In this video, I'm going to take a previous program that was illustrated where you read the data from a file and we wrote the output to a file. Now we're going to subdivide some of the tasks so that one task will be used to open a file to read the data, and another task would be to open a file to write the output. Well, why would I want to do something like this? Because this is a task that is frequently utilized in programming, so we can take this code and we can reuse it for several different programs. So let's go and show you how to perform and create these different subtasks. Here's the previous pseudocode. And because we are creating some new subtasks in our pseudocode to read data from a file and write output to a file, in the main function to read the data from the file, we're going to call the function to open a file to read the data, store the data, close that file where the data was read, call a function to open a file for output, and we will write the results to a file, close the file, etc. Now, what's going to be different here is that right below here, right after the main program, we're going to have a sub function to open file for reading data. Actually, what we're really doing is creating a function to open a file. That is to say, open a file for reading the data, and a function that opens a file that writes the data. And so let's take a look at the pseudocode again. As you look at it, we call a function to open a file for reading, and then the file is going to be stored inside the data after it has been opened for reading. Close the file. We call a function to open a file for writing the output to a file, and so it actually writes the results to a file. We close that file where the data is written, and we end the main function that was designed for reading and writing data to and from a file. So now here's the subfunction to open a file for reading. What it entails is asking the user to enter a file name where the data is to be read from, store the file name as an object, return the file name and the object. A subfunction to open a file to write the output. We ask the user to enter a file name where the results will be written, store the file name as an object, return the file name and the object. These are frequently used functions in a lot of programs. So rather than rewriting this code all the time, we store them as functions and call them as they are needed. So next we're going to show you how this looks in Python and how you would go about these steps, performing these steps in Python. First, let's identify those statements that we use to ask the user to read the data from a file and open a file, etc. So here are the statements. It's just so happened that we also use the exception in here, so we're going to continue to utilize this in the actual function because we're checking to make sure the file does exist. So the first step is I'm going to highlight from lines 4 through 19. I'll first copy it rather. And then at the bottom of my main program, which I have not set it up as a main program as of yet, but I will. And then I'm going to say function to open a file So we're a function to open a file to read the data. DEF open, and you can call it read data if you want to. So all I did was copy the steps that we used earlier to read the data. Eventually I'll have to get rid of this and just call this information where all these steps are. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines. We're going to convert that into a function. I will backspace and say return. What do I want to return to the main program that needs it? Is the file object, the file name, and the file object, and the open read data function. That's where we ended right here. And we're going to do the same thing, or go through the same steps for open a file for output. So now that I have created a function to open a file to read the data, I have created a function to open the file to write the data, write the output. So I'll just say open write output, open. Now I've called that file open write file. The next step is to create my main function. And we can just call this main function. DEF main, open close parentheses, colon, press the enter key, which indicates that all of these statements must be indented. And of course there are some things we're going to get rid of, but we're going to indent all the statements associated with the main program. So now we have all the statements that are associated with the main program are indented. And what we're going to do here is say in main function. Now there are some duplicate lines here. What we're going to do here is call the function to open a file for reading the data. And all of these statements here are going to be removed, and we're going to call the function here. So we're going to call the function to open a file for reading the data. This is where it exists, and of course the data is read and stored in a variable. We close that file object, display some blank lines so that everything is a little bit more readable. Now we're going to call the function to write the results to the file, which is these instructions below. So we're going to get rid of this, all of these instructions here, and we're going to call that function that performed those tasks. So we'll say file out, comma, out file is equal to open write file. So what did we do? We eliminated all these steps, which is quite a bit. And when we get ready to call the function, this is what we're going to see. And what happens is we are eliminating all these extra steps, so our program becomes a little bit shorter. However, the functions are following that. And then the last step would be to call the main program. Now we're going to call the main program, and we close the main program module. Just before we run the program, I wish to make sure that I have file in, in file, because I believe I had file out there, and that was not correct. It's equal to open the file for reading, and then file out file. Okay, so now we're ready to run the program. Enter the file where you would like to read the data from. Okay, so suppose I type in philosopher, because that's what someone told me the file name was. Well, it said it doesn't exist. What about PHILO? Nope, doesn't exist. So the file name philosophers is what we wish to use. That is the correct file name where we're going to be reading from. Enter the file where you wish to write the results to, and I'll just say philosophers full report or something like that. And what's going to happen is it says contents from the philosophers.txt file has been written to the philosophers full report.txt file. Be sure to view it in the same folder where the Python source code was stored. So wherever this source code was stored, the output file and the input file should be stored in that same folder or directory where this source code has been placed. Once we run the program, we're going to end up in our directory with 3 different files: the source program file with the py extension, the philosopher's text file that should have already been there. This one should also, because you wrote the program. And when the program is run, it's going to create this output file. So there will be 3 different files stored in the same directory where your source program file is. That's the one that contains the main function. Make sure you understand that that is what is happening as we are working with the various files. So in your folder that you designated to store your work, here's your source code. That's the Python program. Next, the data file where you stored it in a notepad. Well, actually, this is the report. Here is the data file right here. And so it contains the data, and then when you open the file to write the results, this is what it's going to look like. And there will be 3 distinct files in your directory. Please make sure that you understand this concept, and I was trying to illustrate it in a drawing here, and that's what I mean by that. This is like your file folder or your disk where you stored your work, and your source code, the text file where you read your data from, and the computer produces the output. Feel free to review this video as often as necessary in order to understand the concepts.